My name is Marcus. This happened when I was 19, during what should have been the best summer of my life. I was working as a night security guard at a storage facility just outside the city limits. It wasn't glamorous work, but the pay was decent and the shifts were easy. Most nights, I'd sit in the little security booth watching old movies on my laptop, doing hourly rounds through the maze of storage units. The place was huge, like 3 football fields of corrugated metal buildings and gravel roads, all surrounded by a chain-link fence that was supposed to keep people out. I say supposed because the lock on the back gate had been broken for weeks, and my supervisor kept saying he'd get it fixed, but never did. I'm not going to bore you with every detail of what working there was like. It was a storage facility. I'm sure you can imagine it yourself. One night in late July, I was about 3 hours into my shift when I noticed something off during my rounds. It was one of those oppressively hot summer nights where the air feels thick and heavy, like you're breathing through a wet towel. The kind of night where your shirt sticks to your back the second you step outside. I hate that feeling more than anything, but it was unavoidable. The security booth had AC, but the rest of the facility was just open air and humidity. I was driving the golf cart through the rows of units when I saw it. Unit 347 had its door rolled up about 2 feet, just enough for someone to slip underneath. That caught my attention immediately because I knew for a fact it had been closed during my last round. I remember that distinctly because 347 was one of the larger units, and I always checked it specifically. I slowed the cart down and grabbed my flashlight, trying to decide if I should call my supervisor or just check it out myself. My 19-year-old brain thought of several rational reasons why the door might be open. Maybe the renter had come by late to grab something. Maybe the latch had broken, and the door had rolled up on its own. Maybe I was just remembering wrong. It really could have been any number of things. But the second I got off the golf cart, I started having second thoughts. The facility was dead quiet except for the hum of the streetlights and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. I don't know if this will make sense, but there's this feeling you get when you're alone in a huge, empty space at night. Like you're being watched even though logically you know no one's there. That's what it felt like standing in front of that unit. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, shining my flashlight under the gap, trying to see if anyone was inside. I couldn't see much, just stacks of boxes and furniture covered in tarps. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Not loud, but definitely there. Deep, slow breaths coming from somewhere inside the unit. I backed up a step and called out, asking if anyone was in there. My voice came out shakier than I wanted it to. No response. Just more breathing. I was about to call my supervisor when I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, more like something heavy being dragged across concrete. The sound made my skin crawl. I turned to head back to the golf cart, planning to radio this in and let someone else deal with it. But before I could take 2 steps, the unit door rolled up completely with this horrible metallic screech that echoed through the whole facility. I froze. Standing in the doorway was a man. At least I think was a man. He was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but I could see his eyes reflecting the beam of my flashlight. They were wide, unblinking, locked directly on me. For what felt like forever, neither of us moved. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me, trying to figure out what I was going to do. That's when I noticed he was holding something. A crowbar, rusted and bent at one end. I didn't wait to see what he was going to do with it. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran as fast as I've ever run in my life back to that golf cart. I jumped in and floored it, not looking back, just focusing on getting to security booth where I could lock the door and call the police. Behind me, I heard him yell something. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was angry, almost desperate. When I finally made it back to the booth, I slammed the door shut and locked it, then grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called 911. The operator told me to stay put, and that officers were on their way. While I waited, I kept watching security cameras, trying to see if the man was still out there. I cycled through every feed, but I couldn't find him. He'd just vanished. The police showed up about 15 minutes later. There were 3 of them, and they searched the entire facility with me. We went back to Unit 347 together, but it was empty. The door was still rolled up, but there was no sign of anyone. No footprints in the dust, no disturbed boxes, nothing. One of the officers asked if I was sure about what I'd seen, and I told him I was absolutely certain. He didn't seem convinced, but he wrote down my statement anyway. It took me the entire rest of my shift for the whole thing to sink in. I didn't really grasp the gravity of the situation until the sun came up. If that man had wanted to hurt me, he could have. I was completely alone out there with no real way to defend myself. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how lucky I was that I'd run when I did. But what was he doing in that unit? Was he living there? Had he broken in to steal something? I don't know. What I do know is that I quit that job 2 weeks later. I told my supervisor I was moving back home for school, but really I just couldn't handle the thought of being out there alone at night anymore. I probably would have forgotten all about this if my old roommate hadn't brought it up last month. I didn't even remember it at first. It's probably best I forget about it again, but I figured I'd share here before that happens. This happened 3 summers ago. I'm 35 now, divorced, no kids. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which sounds cool because I get to set my own hours, but mostly just means I work from home in sweatpants and barely talk to other humans. A few years back, I inherited a cabin in the mountains from my uncle. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom A-frame tucked into the woods about 4 hours north of where I live. My favorite part about it by far is the wraparound porch that looks out over this incredible valley. You can see for miles when the weather's clear. I started going up there whenever I needed to disconnect. A long weekend here, a week there, it became my escape from the noise of regular life. This story takes place during one of those trips in mid-August. I'd driven up on a Thursday afternoon, planning to stay through the following Tuesday. I remember that first night clearly. It was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that made the pine trees whisper. I'd spent the evening on the porch with a book and a bottle of bourbon, just enjoying the solitude. The cabin doesn't have Wi-Fi and cell service is spotty at best, which is honestly one of my favorite things about it. Forces you to actually unplug. That night, I went to bed around midnight. The cabin only has 2 bedrooms, but I always sleep in the smaller one because it has a window that faces east and I like waking up with the sunrise. I was just starting to drift off when I heard something outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching to the gravel driveway. I sat up and listened, thinking maybe it was a deer or some other animal, but the rhythm was all wrong. These were definitely human footsteps. 2 feet, steady pace, coming closer to cabin. My first thought was that someone had gotten lost hiking and needed help. It happens sometimes up there. People underestimate the trails and end up wandering around after dark. I got out of bed and walked to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The porch light was on, casting this pale yellow glow across the front of the cabin, and standing at the edge of that light was a woman. She was young, maybe in her 20s, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was just standing there, completely still, staring at the cabin. I waited for her to knock or call out, but she didn't. She just stood there. After maybe 30 seconds, she took a few steps closer, then stopped again. This went on for what felt like 5 minutes. Step pause, like she was testing how close she could get. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to open the door and ask if she needed help, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. The way she moved, the way she didn't call out, the fact that she was up here alone in the middle of the night. None of it added up. I decided to wait it out, see what she'd do. Maybe she'd realize no one was coming to the door and leave. But instead, she kept getting closer. Eventually, she reached the porch steps and started climbing them, one at a time, still moving in that slow, deliberate way. When she got to the top, she walked right up to the front door and pressed her face against a window, cupping her hand around her eyes to see inside. I ducked down below my bedroom window, heart racing, praying she hadn't seen me. I could hear her moving around on the porch, trying the door handle. It rattled but didn't open. Thank God I'd locked it. Then I heard her walk around the side of the cabin. I army crawled across my bedroom floor to the other window and peeked out, trying to see where she'd gone. She was checking every window, tugging on them, trying to find one that was unlocked. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course. I thought about making a run for my car, but she was on the side of the cabin closest to the driveway. I'd have to get past her, and I didn't like my chances. That's when I heard the sound that still gives me nightmares. Scratching. She was scratching at one of the windows with something metal, maybe a key or a knife. Long, slow scrapes against the glass. I realized she was trying to break in. I had to do something. I went to my uncle's bedroom where I knew he kept an old hunting rifle in the closet. I'd never fired it, barely knew how to hold it properly, but I figured just having it might scare her off. I loaded it with trembling hands, then went to the front door and yelled through it that I was armed and had already called the police. For a moment, everything went quiet. No footsteps, no scratching, nothing. Then I heard her laugh. Not a normal laugh, but this high-pitched, almost childlike giggle that made my blood run cold. She called back something I can't bring myself to repeat, something vulgar and threatening, then went back to scratching at the window. I fired a shot into the air through the open front door. The sound was deafening in the quiet mountain air. And just like that, she stopped. I heard her footsteps running away from the cabin, crashing through the underbrush, getting fainter and fainter until they disappeared completely. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with the rifle across my lap, watching the windows, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally came up, I packed my things and drove straight home. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I just wanted to get out of there. A few days later, I called the local sheriff's department to report what had happened. The deputy I spoke with took my statement and said they'd send someone to check it out, but I never heard back. I asked if there had been any similar incidents reported in the area, and he said no, which somehow made it worse. I didn't go back to the cabin for over a year. When I finally did, I installed new locks on every door and window, put up security cameras, and made sure my phone had one of those satellite communicators for emergencies. I've been back a few times since then, and nothing's happened. Everything's been quiet, normal. But I still can't shake the memory of that woman's face pressed against the glass, or the sound of her scratching at the window, trying to get in. I still don't know who she was or what she wanted. I probably never will. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I grew up in a coastal town where everyone knew everyone, and summer lasted from May to September. My favorite season was always summer. It still is, actually, though I don't get to spend as much time near the ocean anymore. A lot of what made summer so special to me is tied to living by the water. There was something about the salt air, the sound of waves, and the feeling of sand between your toes that I loved. Something I could never find living inland. It's hard to explain, but I just felt so free, like I could disappear for hours and no one would know. Summer nights were always the best. The darkness added to the feeling of adventure that the teenage version of me craved. I was 17 at the time. I had a boyfriend back then named Connor. He was a little more daring than me, always pushing the limits in small ways. One random night in June, we decided to go night swimming. Just us, some towels, and a six-pack of beer we convinced Connor's older brother to buy for us. It wasn't the first time we'd done something like this. Actually, it's something we did quite often. That is, until what I'm about to tell you happened. Come to think of it, this was probably the last time we ever went swimming together at night. We didn't have a specific plan, just a direction. We wanted to go somewhere new since the usual spots were getting crowded even at night. Connor said he knew a good place past a marina, some rocky beach where tourists never went because it was hard to access. It was sometime around 11 o'clock when we left. I'm not sure how long we walked, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30, but we didn't stop until we were completely alone. At some point, Connor just stopped walking and told me we were here. I wasn't really sure what here meant since it was pretty dark, and the beach looked like every other stretch of coastline, but it still felt perfect, quiet, secluded, just the sound of waves and the glow of the moon on the water. We spread out our towels and popped open the beers. The water looked incredible, almost glowing in the moonlight. Connor stripped down to his swim trunks and ran straight in, yelling for me to follow. I laughed and joined him, and for a while, everything was perfect. We splashed around, floating on our backs, pointing out boats in the distance. Our goal on nights like this was always the same. Just forget about everything else and enjoy being young and stupid. At one point, Connor swam farther out, and I told him not to go too far. He just laughed and kept going, so I followed. The water was deeper there, too deep to touch bottom, and the current was stronger than I expected. We treaded water for a minute, and that's when I felt something brush against my leg. At first I thought it was seaweed, but then it wrapped around my ankle. Not wrapped exactly, but grabbed, like fingers. I screamed and kicked, trying to pull away, and whatever was let go. Connor asked what was wrong, and I told him something had touched me. He said it was probably just a fish or some kelp, but I knew what I felt. Those were fingers. We started swimming back toward shore, but I felt it again, this time on both legs. A grip, cold and firm, pulling me down. I went under before I could take a breath, water flooding my nose and mouth. I fought against it, kicking and thrashing, but whatever had me was strong, really strong. Through the murky water, I could see shapes moving below me, dark, writhing shapes that didn't look like any fish I'd ever seen. I broke the surface for a second, gasped for air, and screamed Connor's name. Then I went under again. This time I saw it clearly. A face, pale, almost luminescent in the dark water, with eyes that were too big and a mouth that was too wide. It stared at me with this expression I can't even describe. Not quite human, not quite anything. Its hand was clamped around my ankle, pulling me deeper, and I realized with absolute terror that I was going to drown. I kicked at its face with my free leg, connected with something soft, and its grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I swam up, breaking the surface and gasping for air, then swam toward shore as fast as I've ever swum in my life. Connor was already on the beach, and when I stumbled out of the water, I collapsed on the sand, coughing and crying. He asked what happened, and I tried to explain, but the words came out all jumbled. Something grabbed me, something in the water. It had a face. He looked at me like I was losing it, then looked back at the ocean. The water was completely still. No movement, no splashing, nothing. Just the gentle rhythm of waves on the shore. He suggested maybe I got entangled in fishing line or a net, that the panic had made me see things that weren't there. But I knew what I saw. That face, those eyes, the way it looked at me. We grabbed our stuff and left immediately. I didn't even bother with my towel or the rest of the beer. I just wanted to get away from that beach. The walk back felt like it took forever. It was probably the most unsettled I'd ever felt walking along the coastline at night. I kept looking back, expecting to see something following us, but the beach was empty. When we finally made it back to town, Connor walked me home and made me promise not to tell anyone what happened. He was worried people would think we were drunk or making it up. I agreed, but I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I did some research online, trying to figure out what I'd encountered. I read about riptides and how they can feel like something pulling you down. I read about hallucinations caused by panic and oxygen deprivation. I even read about local legends of things that live in the water, though most of that seemed like folklore and tourist trap nonsense. Nothing explained what I saw. That face, those hands, the intelligence behind those eyes. For weeks, I couldn't go near the water. Even walking along the boardwalk made me anxious. Connor tried to convince me to go swimming again, said I just needed to face my fear, but I refused. Eventually, we broke up, not because of that night specifically, but it definitely changed things between us. He thought I was being dramatic, and I thought he was being dismissive. We just couldn't get past it. I moved away for college that fall, and didn't come back to that town for years. When I finally did visit, I made a point of avoiding that beach. I don't know what grabbed me that night. I've gone over 1,000 times in my head, trying to rationalize it, trying to find a logical explanation. But every time I close my eyes, I see that face staring up at me from the dark water. I see those two wide eyes and that too wide mouth. I wouldn't call myself superstitious or a believer in the paranormal, but everyone I tell this story to immediately attributes it to something unnatural. And maybe they're right, but I really don't like thinking about that. I do consider the possibility that it was just a panicked hallucination, that my brain filled in details that weren't really there. Either way, I get a really unsettled feeling whenever I'm near the ocean at night. Like something happened to me that summer that I'll potentially never understand for as long as I live. I haven't heard from Connor in years, but I'd bet my life on the fact that he still remembers that night, even if he won't admit something was actually in that water with us.